Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So, planning the transition from linear to IP distribution. It's a huge topic that covers pretty much everything. I mean, the whole industry is moving to IP across all forms of distribution of video. And I guess it also embraces linear, because linear will be moving ultimately to IP for the most part too. Recently, we interviewed the head of engineering at ITV, who described the transition as akin to the HS2 project, which is perhaps an unfortunate metaphor for a big project, but hopefully this transition will be a lot smoother than that one. Here to discuss the topic, we have three guys who cover different aspects of the industry and different aspects of this transition. And they'll have some pretty interesting things to say about their own field of expertise. So we have Brad Wall, who's CTO LTN. Brad's focused on evangelizing LTN's capabilities and solutions to the big media companies of the world. He's a proven strategic team leader and industry innovator with more than 25 years of experience across some of the industry's leading names. And he's going to explore the benefits of shifting to IP-based media distribution and the business and technology factors that decision makers need to consider, as well as the need for cost savings and workflow efficiencies. Then we have Gary Hamer, who is SVP Global Sales and Business Development at Smart Labs. Gary initially studied physics and planetary and space physics before joining the UK Met Office as a research scientist. So he's a varied career before coming into the world of video. He transitioned from consulting at Logica to business development and sales at Yes TV, for those of you who remember Yes TV, and then at Amino. In 2014, after 10 years, Gary left his role as SVP Global Sales at Amino to join Smart Labs, where he leads their international expansion plans. And Gary is going to share his experience of moving customers from legacy systems and delivering seamless streaming solutions for operators that are new to the sector. And then finally, we have Paul Martin, who is Strategy and Business Development Director at Mainstreaming. Paul holds a business degree from University of Texas and an MBA from Cambridge. His career spanned everything from international tennis and multiple technology industries, including semiconductors, broadband, broadcasting, and now streaming. Since he joined Mainstreaming, he has been working with customers to help develop their CDN strategies and plans. And he's also the OTT editor of the Broadcast Bridge, which gives him further deep visibility into technology, services, and requirements across the OTT technology chain. And Paul can draw on his experience to share insights and the benefits of the move to IP, assessing capacity requirements and the need for scalability in particular. Now we're going to begin with a brief presentation from Brad, and then we'll take a discussion at the end. So Brad, can you kick off, please? Thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We're still morning. All right, so we're afternoon, actually. I'm sorry. But first off, thank you very much, IBC, for having us here today and being able to make the presentation. I wanted to start a little bit, tell you a little bit more about LTN and who we are as a company, who our customers are, and sort of what we do. Ultimately, LTN, we are a media technology and managed solutions provider for the media and broadcast space. Our customers are generally the largest media and broadcast companies in the world, also sports rights holders, sports leagues in the US and EMEA. And we're working more and more with digital media providers and distributors of content. So there's a little bit about what our customers are. What I wanted to tell you a little bit more about today was LTN Wave. Sort of at the center of the LTN ecosystem of all of our suites of products and services is our core IP transport network. And at LTN, we've built the world's largest, most reliable, and fastest global IP video transport network. We're the established leader in that space. So when we talk in this conversation today, there tends to be a fiber or satellite discussion. We're a very different solution than those two. which we'll get into a little bit deeper. But this is at the core of LTN Wave is being able to allow our customers to make this transition from a linear or a baseband type technology and a solution over into IP and provide quite a bit of new sort of intelligent services inside of our core network. A lot of people think of that transition as sort of a simple flip of a switch and I'm going from an older technology to a newer technology. But there's quite a bit more that you can do, and I know this is going to be part of our discussion today. What you can do in IP from a business perspective. How can our customers do more with less? How can they do things in an IP manner, which they couldn't do in those legacy technologies. So we're excited about that. We put a lot of our time, our attention, and our efforts, both in R&D and development and deployment perspective, around creating intelligence inside of our network versus the legacy technologies where typically the feed was sort of a dumb feed and the intelligence was at the edges. And so we're bringing all that inside the LTN core network. This is what we called Wave. And it's one of the products that we'll be debuting and talking quite a bit of customers at the show about. So overview of LTN, that's who we are. We also have our QR code here for anybody who would like to set up a meeting with us, and we've also got some stickers up around the booth here. So 5.A76 is where we are located, right down the way here. If anybody wants to set up a meeting, we'd love to speak with you. Great.
Thanks very much, Brad, for that introduction to LTN. So next we have Gary, who's going to deliver his presentation.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Stuart, for that introduction. And it reminds me I need to update my LinkedIn profile biog. The fact that I did physics isn't really of much interest nowadays. My name's Gary Hamer. I'm the SVP of Sales and Business Development at Smart Labs. Our booth is closest. So Brad, you might have the stickers, but we're just over there. So we've got dibs on the first people coming out, okay? So Smart Labs, we're a software solution vendor. Our services drive multi-screen, multi-network TV services for ISPs and service providers around the world. And that covers, it inhabits the space from the head end, whether that's the cloud or on-prem, right through to the devices in your customers' hands and in their living rooms. So media storage, monitoring, app development, etc. I'd love to tell you more about that a bit later on. This is just a brief summary of Smart Labs, just 3 boxes really of interest. The first one, we've been around 15 years or so now. It feels just like yesterday, but the industry is moving so quickly. And perhaps it's the most exciting time at the moment with developments and certainly the topic we're talking about today. We've got over 7 million customers. Really, they're our customers using our device, our solutions every day. So we've got that scale. And probably the most important one for today's topic is the one bottom left there, where we've migrated over 1 million of our customers from a legacy platform to multi-screen, IP-centric platforms. We're obviously international, etc. This is our deployment base. So as you can see, Argentina and Latin America, 27 states in North America, Eastern Europe, and our friends in the Maldives, which is a great place to holiday. It's a really international issue that we're talking about today. Different sectors have different issues to cover, but it really is a global move, so a really big opportunity for a lot of businesses. Over the last few years, most of our customers, if not all, have been migrating from a legacy TV platform of some description over to a multi-screen, IP-centric platform. And that's where the 1 million customers come from. And our project experience really shows that the typical project will navigate from through 3 milestones, depending on where they're starting and what technology they have deployed. So initially, we have that broadcast service that we all grew up with, the one we're all familiar with. and the one that you still walk into meetings now and say, yeah, but I want a grid EPG. It's got to be time across the top, channels down the side. It drives us crazy. But that's what we're all familiar with. That's TV as we know it. Okay, so this was one receiver to one television, broadcast only, one-way communication. Everybody saw the same thing, and your choice was this channel or that channel. That was broadcast TV. To my amazement, as the youngster in the room, there's still so many operators with this type of service. There's still a lot of people doing cable, a lot of people doing satellite, and that's their business base. We then moved to hybrid, where we introduced IP to the mix, and that introduced two-way communication of some sort. It allowed the EPGs to be more up-to-date, which was great. On-demand services, so video on demand, etc., became an add-on, another revenue-generating opportunity for the customers, and it allowed the telcos to enter the industry. And this was where I entered the business 20 years ago now, was when BT was starting to think about adding IP and putting TV and over their service. So the telcos become a TV service provider. And then the final step is really what we're all embracing today, and that's the introduction of OTT, which allowed us to start delivering to more screens, more devices, mobile devices, smart TVs, other devices around the home, retail streaming devices for one. And that really allowed us to open up the service to many new eyeballs, many new screens, both on-net and off-net, so you get this multi-network functionality. The key with this is that you've got this two-way communication on many screens, and it also allowed the broadcasters and the content owners to go direct to consumer and enter this market. And that's what we've all seen recently. So on one side, you've got this great opportunity to increase your footprint, to increase the offering to your customer base. And then on the other side, you've got these giants like Disney coming in and going direct to consumer and cutting you out of that, or the operators out of that market. So on one side, it's a technology advance. On the other side, we have this cord cutting, people having a decision about where they get their services. So whilst this is a great end game, if you like, everyone's driving IP, actually it's opening up the business situation and the business issues that we're all dealing with. And that's causing operators to look at personalized advertising, AVOD, fast channels, ad insertion, really as an additional revenue generating angle to allow these services to continue to make revenue. Okay? So the direction of travel is very clear. We've gone from broadcast to hybrid to multi-screen, but really, in my opinion, it's like most of these things, that once you get to the end of the path, you sort of wish that you shut some of those doors behind you as you went, because actually the business issues that this has brought up for the operators are really significant, and we're seeing terrifying numbers of churn in North America especially, and we're starting to see it across Europe as well. So technology, great. Commercially, we need to resolve some of these issues, and I'm sure I can see Stuart writing things down there, so I'm sure we'll talk about that during the panel. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gary. That's a great overview of some of the issues that the industry faces, particularly on the service provider side. And finally, we have Paul, who's going to talk about some of the strategy and planning that's required for live in particular.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here with Mainstreaming. My name's Paul Martin, and Mainstreaming as a business is very much focused on the OTT space and direct-to-consumer streaming. So that's going to be the angle of interest that we're taking in this panel. We serve major customers around the world. Leading customers like DAZN rely on Mainstreaming services to deliver live streaming at scale, and that's going to be a focal point. But I think, as you'll see from the slides, our interest is how do we transition broadcasters who are seeing the transition of their audiences from linear-based viewing into true OTT viewing at scale. But before I just do that, Stuart mentioned a background perspective I have, which we'll bring to this presentation. And if it will come up. Sorry, I see the slide there. Try one more time. Nope. Okay, sorry. Okay, a busy slide. Just to quickly give perspective on my view, which I plan to build on during this. My background covers semiconductors to broadband to play out to streaming, picking up on cable TV as well in there. And the most recent experience here working with mainstreaming and also as editor at the Broadcast Bridge has given me fantastic insight into what these brands on the right and what those companies are trying to do and how we're all trying to support this transition. And I think we're going to be talking a bit about the benefits of IP distribution. What are they? And I think conceptually, the thing that grabs me the most actually goes back to this, let's say, pull system dynamics that I was involved in early in my own career, is that IP distribution, especially with OTT streaming in mind, is giving us a return path revolution, right? We can see what the viewers want. We can see what they're doing. And that really, for me, is giving us much, much deeper capability to engage customers, drive the customer experience better, and commercialize that relationship more effectively. So that's the promise that we're all chasing when we think about IP distribution, especially for direct-to-consumer streaming. But when we talk to customers, when we look at the industry and the market, this is the mainstreaming perspective that we have. So like any good distribution-focused business, we care about having the right capacity to meet the demand that the viewers and our customers are placing on us. And if I look at this is just an example. Many markets have very similar pictures that look the same. So this is a UK example with some UK numbers. On the top right-hand corner, through the middle, first of all, you see a distribution chain that is typical for us. Origin, CDN, into the ISPs, to the viewers. And we have certain capacities in place in this ecosystem, not all mainstreaming, but between us and the ISPs. On the far right of this picture, consumers think this should just work. IP streaming should just work. The capacity that's available to us at home is enormous when you add it up. The UK estimate would be broadband adds up to a couple of thousand terabits per second. But the demand of broadcasters right now today is give or take 10 to 20% of the total viewing happening on their OTT platforms. So we're at the beginning still of the volumes and the scale that we're going to see in the coming years. And that's occasionally driving 20 to 30 terabits per second of total demand on the CDNs, on the ISP infrastructure. Actually, the UK hit a record in February this year with 100 terabits per second, reported by the 4 ISPs. That was a record for streaming delivery over the internet. And yet we've got lots more capacity than that at the broadband level. So, but that's today. And then as we think about tomorrow, again, it's going to play catch up. Sorry. As we think about tomorrow, here's our perspective. That capacity to support a lot more demand. And again, top right corner would say, when we've all got 1 gig to the home, not that far in the future, 27,000 terabits per second of capacity could exist at a consumer level. Broadcasters, UK market in particular, think 50% of total viewing will be on their OTT services by 2028. What's that going to drive? Probably above 100 terabits per second, routinely. We need to be ready for that. That broke the UK's record for internet-based streaming this year. That's going to be routine delivery. And what does it mean when we go beyond that? When we're above 50%? So this is the challenge that we believe needs solving and that we're keen to solve. That white paper with the QR code on the left is a recent white paper we did with a DAZN case study in it about how they're solving this problem when they're hitting very large live audiences for major sports rights in key countries around the world. So I very much look forward to the panel and discussing these subjects. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. Can you join on stage? Thanks. So I'll start with you, Paul, just taking up something you said there, which was the scale of the challenge that people face in making this transition. We know some of the things that are driving the transition, consumer habits, changing demand, the rise of direct-to-consumer streaming, and the business models have changed from content rights holders and so forth. That's all shifting things. But the challenge is huge, particularly when you talk about moving broadcast to IP. That's massive. I mean, I talked about the ITV guy who said it was like HS2, which is, if you don't know, HS2 is like a huge rail project that's gone massively wrong in the UK, and the costs have ballooned. So how well prepared do you think the industry is at the moment to meet that challenge, given the progression towards IP consumption that we're seeing, and what needs to be put in place to make it?
Yeah. I mean, from a distribution perspective, if I stick to that scope that I described, where we're origins, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud, into the viewers, and whether we're talking fixed broadband or we're talking mobile delivery, where fixed broadband with a large screen experience is driving the vast majority of traffic, and we think probably will continue to do so, even if mobile is a big sector on its own. It's often short form, it's often smaller bit rates and resolutions and so on. The biggest challenge we see is for this to scale efficiently and sustainably, which are two topics at the top of our mind, we need to push the edge has to go closer to the consumer, which sounds really simple. The challenge with that is how telco networks, broadband networks, mobile networks can allow that to happen. And will they allow it fast enough? Because as a CDN and the technologies you have within a CDN environment can handle the scale. I don't see unicast-only models, for example, as a problem, especially if we want the two-way communication. We want to do personalized viewing, want targeted ads, and so on. We want people to press pause. I don't see it as a problem. The problem is when that edge point is too far away from the consumer, and we see congestion. We see networks that fail. And then you see viewer experiences that fail. And so one of the big conversations I think has got to continue happening is between a content provider and the ISPs around the world about how we deliver the best viewing experiences to the shared consumers that exist between those two entities. And that's all about how you deploy your infrastructure so that it can deliver at scale. There's no point hanging back with edge caching at a peering point and finding bottlenecks that stop you from delivering very well.
Yeah. Now you've worked closely with DAZN, and DAZN have had well publicized problems delivering scale in Italy, for example, where they had the Serie A rights. It's a mass market proposition. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about how that problem really gets addressed, what the problem is and how it gets addressed?
Yeah. So the problem is, let's say, multifaceted. Because when you're talking about direct-to-consumer streaming and you're talking about these big live events where millions of people come into a platform simultaneously, you need to the load of all the levels of the platform have to scale quickly. And so some of the problems really go back to how the app is being delivered, how the DRM is working, and then of course in the middle as well, how the CDNs and the networks that they're working across are also able to scale quickly. A lot of it's about have you tested the capacity ahead of time? Not easy. How do you load test for 5 million people, apart from streaming to 5 million people? It's not an easy problem to solve. And so when it happens, we're learning all the time, and you quickly adapt into, okay, we understand where the weak points where we need to fix it. But a lot of the infrastructure that's being used, whether it's cloud for the centralized origin environments, or whether it's distributed architectures and infrastructure for the CDNs and what the ISPs themselves have, which can be different, of course. A lot of it's multi-tenanted. A lot of it is needing to spin up or down quickly. And I think we're going to continue to hit wall after wall after wall. As we continue to scale, we're going to find problems all the time as people break through the barriers of scale. But the basic premise is you need your capacity to be deployed correctly, and then it works.
Yeah. Gary, have you seen similar issues when you look at service providers? I mean, you talked a lot about some of the service providers who are looking to make this transition,
Yeah, do we see the same issue? A lot of our customers as service providers tend to have their own networks, so their own network teams, and a better understanding perhaps of the topology and their points of presence, and they're pushing their own service caches, to the perhaps to the true edge, if you like. But that network planning is a core decision point for a lot of operators. A lot of operators in our world have been delivering multicast over IP, so they've had closed, dedicated networks. They're now embracing OTT and going unicast, and the network changes, the topology changes, the engineering training and experience that's required to now manage that type of network are all key things that in the planning of making these transitions really need to be made. But a lot of our customers have moved to pure HLS or DASH, ABR, adaptive bitrate streaming on their networks. They've got rid of their multicast completely, and they're seeing cost savings in retiring that old equipment or rationalizing their networks. So I think the network capacity, yes, it's a key point of discussion. The fear that the DAZN issues or other issues, let's not pick on them, the other issues in the industry that have occurred terrify operators, because operators and telcos are working on a 5.9 reliability. If there's a customer call, it's costing them $15 for every call. That's wiping out their margin. So if they do anything that stimulates any calls, people get fired. It's business critical issues. So it really gives them big concerns, real concerns. But they do the testing. I think perhaps the operators have more of a robust, because they're in control of that network. So they're able to run those load tests. So perhaps they're slightly more prepared than the pure OTT guys, where they don't have that control down to the customer.
Yeah, they're the ones who get the calls, even if it's a pure OTT service over the top.
Exactly. My Samsung television won't load. That call still costs you $15, and is still an issue because there's an expectation. They're used to having their services delivered to a dedicated set-top box that the operator can manage and really understands and knows how reliable they are and will understand issues. But as soon as you start bringing in third-party devices, especially streaming devices, I bought a $15 stick off Amazon and it won't load your app. No, you're right. But there's an expectation there. So, if that answers the question, I think it's the operators and the telcos are doing all that testing, but opening up the device landscape is a real headache and a real concern. They know it's out there. Okay.
Is there an upside on the technology side to this? I mean, we'll talk about the business opportunity later. I mean, you mentioned that in your opening remarks, but just on the technology platform side, as you move away from legacy DVB, C, or whatever you've got towards IP unicast, is there an upside in terms of simplifying the technology platform?
Yeah, it's a strong point that I sort of bring out, that you're simplifying that delivery architecture and the delivery landscape, which I think has a value to operators and to telcos. I think it's also bringing the fee payers of the next generation into the telcos world, because if the telcos aren't talking apps and mobile first, then they're going to lose an entire generation. Those guys that are just getting into that, because I'm early 50s, and to me, I'm quite happy paying the bill and it's fine. And I watch linear television and that's great. But my daughter and son, they really have switched. I've been sitting in panels like this for a long time and listening to people talking about the move to OTT, and nobody watches linear anymore. But it's real. It's real in my household, and it really is coming. So I think the telcos are embracing the app environment to secure that brand within the household. Because I pay BT probably because my parents paid BT, and that's how it is. And I think they're looking to grab the future fee payers.
Yeah, I mean, you talk there about the apps. Obviously, super aggregation is now a key kind of aspect of all service provider business models. It's bringing those apps and those relationships with the direct-to-consumer streamers onto the set-top box and onto their own distribution. Does that add complexity when you're talking about integrating that somebody else's direct-to-consumer offering onto your own?
It really does. And that's a great question, Stuart, because one of our biggest projects of recent years was migrating O2 in the Czech Republic from a legacy Linux set-top box environment with 450,000 boxes in the field to an Android TV certified platform without engineering visits. So it was all done in the field, all done remotely. Google were a great assistance, but that migration, that move really adds a huge value to those. Even though it was a massively complicated project, O2 see that they now have a super aggregation platform with all of the premium apps that you'd expect that would have simply been impossible on the Linux-based previous platform. So they really do see value in the super aggregation model. My word of warning with super aggregation is that you have to have a scale for it to be really worthwhile, because there's a huge investment, there's ongoing certifications, there's ongoing engineering requirements, literally quarterly releases, which is not a telco's language really, to be forced into these upgrades because this other party says you have to do it. That's a very challenging situation for operators. The larger operators embrace it and they have the resources to do that. But I think a lot of the medium and smaller operators are saying, actually, my customers have got Netflix on their smart TV. I don't need to aggregate it within my platform. It's nice to have, but I'm not going to spend all that money. So there is a conundrum, and there are a few questions about scale. And I think scale is very important when you start opening up the super aggregation discussion.
Do you think there's any answer for those smaller and medium operators on this, or is this an issue that's going to squeeze them out a bit and maybe lead to consolidation? Or?
No, I think they embrace it. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, when Netflix first came to market and the direct-to-consumer guys were growing, there was what do we, are they friend or foe? I think whatever your model, you've got to encourage their usage. If as an operator, it's just a different form of video, and you have to stand proudly against, either with them or beside them. And is it local content? Is it, knowing exactly what your customers want to watch? I think is the way these medium-sized operators compete. They have to understand their customers more broadly and to a deeper degree. And that can come through what other packages you're selling, whether you're a triple play or a quad play or these other services. I think that's the way the middle ground competes. It's super aggregation is not the answer for everybody, would be my summary.
Right. Brad, bringing you in. I mean, we talked a little bit already about live and talking about DAZN and some of the challenges around live, especially when you reach peaks and troughs of demand. What's your perspective on that? How challenging is live when you bring live streaming at scale into the picture?
Yeah, we sit at LTN a little bit further up the supply chain, if you will, prior to the direct consumer. So we are a B2B business and providing the IP infrastructure, if you will, to be able to allow broadcasters to move off of traditional distribution and contribution technologies. I think if you would humor me for 1 second, I have this metaphor that I like to use, I think that kind of applies here, which is, I call it my bow tie. So think of a bow tie, if you will, right? On one side of the bow tie, you've got this explosion of different types of content that's being produced. New live events, new live sporting events that are almost hyper-local in their nature, that weren't produced 6 months ago or 8 months ago or 4 years ago or 10 years ago. On the other side of the bow tie, you've got this explosion of new platforms and distribution mechanisms and over-the-top services, and it doesn't seem like a month goes by in the US where there's not a new digital MVPD that's being, that's launching. And content providers are both creating much more content, both on a live perspective and an on-demand perspective, and they've got to get to all these platforms. You've got this knot, right? The center of the bow tie is the knot in the middle. And to me, that represents legacy legacy business systems, it's legacy workflow, it's legacy way of thinking, it's legacy network architecture, which may or may not have created a capacity issue for you going forward. And it's a mindset is the knot, right? And for us to all embrace IP and to really unravel that knot, in particular around on this explosion of live events and the versioning of those live events out to multiple new locations. And I was seeing some of the charts that you guys had up earlier, and it's 100% agree with where we're headed. Where we are headed is a consumer that has much more choice on the platforms of which they want to watch their content from a hyper-local perspective, and now things are being produced. Sporting events and other things are being produced. Rights are being diversified in a manner in this industry that we've never seen before. And one league in the US, which may have had exclusive rights with a major broadcaster for all sports and all live events, basketball, football, hockey, soccer, you name it. Now they're starting to do a league will do a deal with just basketball to this broadcaster, football to this broadcaster, and that over-the-top platform. And this is creating an extremely dynamic environment for broadcasters, for consumers, and for literally the unraveling of that knot in the middle. And as an industry, I think we're just behind. We've got a lot of work to do, going back to the slides we talked about earlier. There's a lot of work to do in the middle to make sure that we cut through that as an industry.
What are some, without diving too deeply into the weeds of that, what do you think are some of the solutions that might be available? I noticed you mentioned, for example, and it was mentioned before, multicast. Do you think multicast is part of that, or is it a technology that's not necessarily viable for the future? What do you think about that?
Well, the way I like to describe it, and from our perspective on multicast, I think we've all probably heard the analogy, good, fast, cheap. We've all done projects, good, fast, cheap, pick two, right? You never get all three on a good, fast, cheap. I like to equate this transition to IP, if we talk about fiber and satellite and what we do at LTN, is instead of good, fast, cheap, let's call it, reliable, really, really fast, ultra, very low latency, and ultimately, an affordable solution that's multicast. So if you think about reliable, multicast in nature, and very low latency, think of satellite you're going to get to, think of fiber you're going to get to, on the LTN network you're going to get all three. And that's one of the things that kind of makes us really unique in this space, upstream, much further upstream of the supply chain than these gentlemen we were talking about earlier. But that's really our core value proposition. And I think we've, for example, Deutsche Welle is one of our, we announced Deutsche Welle last year at IBC. We're doing all their worldwide distribution, right to their in-market cable providers. And this is something you can do over IP. This is something the transition was fairly seamless for them. And we've got some domestic broadcasters. We're right in the middle of doing that same transition with them right now as well. So it's the business system, it's the knots in the middle that frequently become part of our conversations very quickly. So it sometimes can be very complex, but it's an exciting part of where we're going through as an industry, in my opinion.
Great. Let's talk a little bit some of the time that's left about the upside. We talked about the challenges. Obviously, it's difficult. We know it's going to be a huge challenge to get to IP, but it's being driven by consumers. There's no way around that. Keeping those younger consumers engaged. Older consumers are also moving to non-linear consumption of content. There is an upside. You talked, Gary, about addressable advertising, about some of the other business opportunities there. And the upside, I guess, of IP is that you know what your end users are doing. You've got that return path for each individual unique user. How do you think your service provider customers can best make the most of that opportunity? Because they're not necessarily in the chain when it comes to advertising or some of these other commercialization opportunities.
Yeah, it's a very good question. The operators are not in that food chain with advertising. So they see a lot of content, a lot of advertising being delivered over their platform to their customers that they're not receiving revenue from. So there are discussions that we're involved with at the moment about ad replacement. So being able to replace ads on stored content. So if you've got PVR catch-up content, replacing those adverts with operator sourced advertising. Technically, very straightforward. Commercially, really quite tricky because it's those rights have already been, those advertising rights have already been provided for that piece of content. But the arguments they're trying to unpick, do those rights apply to recorded content? If it's your own recorded content, it's a tricky conundrum. But the operators are trying to embrace it. Cord cutting is a huge issue for them. They're all seeing their revenues dropping off. So they're looking at alternative revenue streams and advertising, whether that's AVOD, so running stings at the beginning of your video assets, or replacing and inserting adverts. They're trying all of that. And then the magic fast channel, which will always just be a linear channel to me in my naivety, but it's, those approaches. Just before this session, there was a guy creating fast channels in 3 minutes, just knocking out new channels. And I think we're going to see an enormous boom. My question there is, what's the commercial model? Who pays, where's the revenue in just creating thousands of fast channels? It's got to be stuff people want to watch. And the operators are smart about that. They understand that they don't just want to fill their service with rubbish. They need to get the right content to there. So it brings me back to understanding their customer and advertising to them in an intelligent way.
I mean, part of that, I guess, is discoverability, which is a whole other topic.
Data-driven, quality of metadata, opening up discoverability is key.
A lot of your customers are in what you might call emerging markets. Are they facing the same challenges, the same pressures that, for example, US cable companies are facing in terms of cord cutting?
Emerging markets. So Eastern Europe has probably got some of the best broadband in our region. So they jumped to hybrid long before we did. They're moving to full IP and dropping their DVB delivery. So O2 in the Czech Republic, when we started, was a hybrid box. It's now a pure, everything is IP. It's all delivered using ABR. So in 7 years, they've gone from a multicast platform to an OTT delivered unicast platform. So Eastern Europe, the pressures are there, but not so great. For Eastern Europe, it's more about forcing people to watch the adverts. So Prima and Nova and those types of providers have got, if you record a channel, you must insist that the customer watches, so you can trick play through the program, but you can't trick play through the adverts. So they're being much more astute about that, and they get breaks on the contracts. They get better pricing if they can force the customers to watch the adverts, that sort of thing. The US, those guys that have always been cable, they are the guys that are jumping very quickly to streaming, embracing streaming wholeheartedly to try and save themselves. I think they see it as a really big issue for them.
Yeah, I mean, we heard about the recent deal between Charter and Disney, where
exactly that
things, linear channels.
And who won that deal?
Paul, what about you? I mean, you talked about the kind of return path revolution and how this might increase commercialization opportunities. What's your perspective on the opportunity for people from this transition?
I think the main one falls to the broadcasters, the ones who never had that visibility before, because their video being delivered through various platforms gave the platform the visibility, but not the content provider. So clearly that's where direct-to-consumer streaming is picked up. But I think most broadcasters, they're making their money from their content. How are they going to make money more from subscriptions or even more from the advertising, but widening the sphere of what they're trying to bring to a consumer, I think is the key. So a business like DAZN, which is a sports streaming business, not a classic national broadcaster, has a very particular type of focus, because you're thinking about fans, you're thinking about casual viewers, you're thinking about the ecosystem of sport. You're not thinking, I just have a subscriber who watches the match. you're thinking, how do you commercialize? And DAZN have done a very good job, I think, recently of adding things like ticket sales, merchandise sales, events, things that add value to what they do as a media business. I suppose for broadcasters, the question is a similar one, and as you're trying to grow your direct relationship with consumers and understand them, is how are you going to widen your sphere of influence in their lives, and the targeted ability that IP distribution gives you is, for me, the magic bullet of that. Because now you can actually go down to minority audiences in a very targeted way and a very accurate way, as long as they're living inside your app for their consumption. And that's, I think, the battle that carries on, aggregation versus not.
Yeah.
We'll see how that plays out.
Okay, I think that's an interesting note to end on. I see we have run out of time, we're a few seconds over. So I'd like to thank everybody, Brad, Gary and Paul, for I think a pretty stimulating discussion on some of the challenges and opportunities associated with the transition to IP. Thanks very much.